They said he taught people how to be free. They said he showed us the staircase out of our small lives, each step paid for in belief and a signature. They said he was a lighthouse. I used to say it too. I was in row 7 the night I first heard him speak. Cheap ballroom chairs, borrowed shoes, a silk scarf that wasn't mine, knotted at my throat. He walked on stage like the room belonged to him, like we did too, and the crowd stood as if pulled by strings. "Your cages weren't built by you," he said, voice warm, honey over ice. "But your keys will be." Laughter, then thunder. I clapped until my palms stung, nails biting crescents I'd find later. He called his company a movement. He called his followers builders. He called me fire. "You've got that heat," he told me on the second night, when he shook my hand and didn't let go. "Keep it pointed at the horizon." I was 32 and exhausted, a mother of none, a collector of almosts, an almost writer, an almost entrepreneur, an almost wife who left before the vows because she couldn't picture forever with the man who wanted to save her before bothering to see her. I didn't need saving. I needed a map. He sold me one. Freedom Academy wasn't a business model, he'd say. It was a philosophy, a science of leverage and leadership. A ladder, not a handout, he'd grin, and people would lean in. The first rung was a $149 mindset intensive, a weekend of chanting and breathwork and exercises where you relived your failures in pairs while a coach kept time like a metronome for pain. The second rung cost $1,200. The third, $6,000. By the fourth rung, you weren't a student anymore. You were an ambassador. "Don't call it recruiting," he told us, chuckling. "Call it remembering who you promised to be." He said we'd attract people like us because we were mirrors. I didn't realize then how right he was. We mirrored his hunger until it replaced our own. The first person I brought in was my sister. The second was my landlord. The third was the barista who wrote Little Sons beside my name on paper cups. I became the kind of woman who approached strangers in vitamin aisles, who asked rideshare drivers if they'd like to learn a better way to breathe, to sell, to live. I bought a blazer I couldn't afford in a color called Power Cranberry. I framed my first bonus check and stood it on the shelf above my desk that doubled as a dining table. "Fire!" He'd call me from stage, and a camera would swing to find my face so it could throw it 10 feet tall on either side of him. "Look what happens when a woman remembers her voltage." The crowd cheered, and I sat a little taller in my cheap seat. We didn't use the phrase pyramid. We said community commerce. We said shared upside. We said generational wealth and residuals, and your sleep should pay you. We didn't talk about the ones who quit, who slid out the back door with empty pockets and a smile so brittle you could shave with it. When someone left, a coach would shake her head and write a single word in the chat. Story. They were telling themselves a story. If they'd changed it, if they'd just believed, everything would have come. I believed. I was good at it. My rank bracelet was green by the 6th month and gold by the 9th. I learned to talk in circles with a point at the end like a pinprick. I learned to coach through hesitation, to frame debt as an investment, to insist that discomfort was proof of an edge you were finally touching. Sometimes I woke at 2:11 a.m. and my stomach was a fist. Sometimes I lay in the dark and thought, if this is freedom, why do I feel like a borrowed suit? I would put a hand on my chest, whisper my affirmations, and return to sleep. His name was Asher Vale. It was his real name. We checked once, though nothing else about him was unadorned. He had a way of dressing that made you feel like Lennon learned English just to be near him. He liked simple songs and expensive tea. He had a daughter somewhere he never spoke about and a habit of twisting his wedding ring when the room got hot. Later, we'd learn the ring came off in every city. Later, we'd learn how many rooms he'd heated. There are men who need to be adored to live, my mother said when she met him, her eyes steady in the way only old eyes can be. Is he one of those? I laughed and said she'd been reading too many paperbacks. She kissed my cheek and patted my hand and told me to be kind and keep receipts. The first receipt I kept was for a hotel ballroom in Tempe we couldn't really afford. 200 chairs, a projection screen, a bouquet of helium balloons, and freedom green. I paid the deposit on my credit card, burned sage in the corners, and rehearsed my story on a stage that smelled like spilled champagne. Who were you? I asked the empty room, before the world told you to be smaller. When the audience came, they cried where they were supposed to and stood at the end and lined up at the back table to sign. 2 women hugged me hard enough to bruise. A man in a blue polo said I'd changed his life. I put the deposit receipt in a folder labeled Miracles. That night, Asher sent me a voice note. Don't let the applause confuse you. It's rent you pay to the future. I played it twice and fell asleep with my phone under my pillow like a talisman against smallness. I didn't see the holes for a long time. Maybe I did and decided they were windows. When someone beneath me didn't earn back their course fees, we called it a lesson in grit. When customer support vanished for 3 days, we called it a test. When the company slashed the payout on 3 ranks and called it dynamic compression, we called it math. A woman named Vera stood outside a hotel at midnight smoking a cigarette she didn't usually smoke, saying she couldn't make rent. I told her to upsell the 3-month package. She told me her daughter needed insulin. We stood there breathing in January, and I squeezed her shoulder like that could be currency and promised I'd figure something out. I didn't. She left the next morning and blocked my number. It's strange how easy it is to be gentle with strangers while practicing a kind of violence on yourself you call devotion. The first crack that didn't heal was the Legacy Fund. It appeared in a video on a Wednesday, sleek and earnest, a new way to accelerate your destiny. You could contribute directly to a pool that would unlock retreats, scholarships, and coaching pods. Asher said the Legacy Fund kept the ladder sturdy. He posted a clip of himself signing a check and writing in a handwritten caption, "We're going to change the way money moves." The clip racked up 3 million views in a week. My team lead told us to seed the pool. I wired $8,000 and told my reflection I was brave. Then the retreats got delayed, the pods got smaller, the scholarships went to influencers with ring lights and hair. Like prayers, you whispered in the mirror. A woman named Marta sent 6 emails asking why the hotel in Tulum had no record of her reservation. She slept in a hammock for 2 nights and came home with a rash and a story about awakening that made me sick. She posted a photo of her sunburned face and captioned it, "Growth hurts." Worth it, I sent her a heart emoji and an ice cube. Then I threw up. When you live inside a story long enough, your body keeps the truth, even when your mouth forgets how. The whistle didn't blow. It hummed like a thing gearing up. First, a Reddit thread titled, "Is Freedom Academy a Scam?" with 2 comments and a shrug. Then, a Medium essay by a woman whose husband had taken out a second mortgage to pay for Ascension 3, the elite mastermind. Then, a podcast episode. Then, a little documentary. Then, a reporter who'd been watching us for a year, who called me and said, very gently, "I think you want to talk." I said no. Then I said, maybe. Then I said, I'd call him back. That night, I replayed an old live stream. Asher, in a white t-shirt, talking about clean ambition, about earning oxygen. In the side chat, people typed fire emojis until the screen looked like a tiny bonfire. He asked for 10 brave souls to step into the next circle and dropped a payment link. He watched the numbers climb and said, "Look at that, another life unlocked." I paused the video when he was smiling with all his teeth and asked the air, "Unlocked for who?" I called the reporter back. I wanted answers, but you don't call a reporter for answers. You call for the courage to say yours aloud. He asked if I knew how the legacy fund was structured. He asked whether I'd ever seen an independent audit. He asked about customer outcomes, refund policies, the ratio of course sales to actual product value. Delivered. He asked if I knew how to read a P&L. I said I knew how to read my team's faces. He sent me documents. He sent me spreadsheets. He sent me screenshots of contracts with clauses that said, in tiny legal grammar, that the money we told people was unlocked had been moved to holdings they would never touch. He sent me court filings from a county I'd never heard of. Older frauds with different names, same structure. I cried into a dish towel. I went for a walk. I sat on a curb outside a taco stand and ate a fish taco with my hands shaking and thought how strange it is that the body keeps eating while the mind collapses. The reporter asked if I'd go on record. I told him I didn't know yet. I told him I needed to see something with my own eyes. So I went to the office. We called it the Temple. Of course we did. It wasn't a skyscraper, just an old bank building we'd painted white and filled with plants that tried their best. When I swiped my badge, the woman at the front desk smiled like nothing was wrong. "He's in," she said, tilting her head toward the glass hallway like an invitation to a sacrament. I walked past the framed photos of Asher with people who'd paid to stand beside him. Celebrities smiling like they'd found a new protein powder. I knocked on his door and stepped inside without waiting, because I was fire, because I'd earned all my names. "Asher," I said, "I need to see the books." He didn't sigh. He didn't storm. He folded his hands and looked like a headmaster with a pretty student who needed gentle correction. "Someone got to you," he said softly, and something in me winced at the phrasing. "No." I kept my voice level. "The numbers got to me." "Numbers," he said, leaning back. "Numbers are such a childish god. I wired $8,000 to a fund that doesn't do what you promised." "It does exactly what I promised." He smiled without teeth. "It creates momentum." "Nothing in this life moves without momentum, darling." And the women sleeping in hammocks because the rooms unlocked weren't real. Is that momentum or theft? We made it right. With product credit. With access. With nothing that cost you money, I said. And there it was. My voice like sandpaper instead of silk. Something sharp surfaced in his eyes, and then it was gone, tucked under that charm like a blade under a napkin. "You're tired," he said. "You've been carrying too much. Let's get you off the front lines for a while." I'll comp you a seat in the next ascension." The room swam a little. "Comp me with what?" I asked. "My own money." He stood. He had 3 inches on me and a lifetime of practice. "Let's not make this adversarial," he murmured. "You're too valuable for that." The word slid around me like a silk rope. Valuable. I wanted to be, of course. That was the point. "I'm going to the board," I said. "You are the board." He laughed, soft and amused and final. "Everyone on it either owes me their life or wants to kiss my ring." He twisted his wedding band and raised an eyebrow. "Pick which one you are." My mouth tasted like metal. "I'm the one who kept receipts." I thought it would land better. He just smiled like I'd brought him a dandelion. "Go home," he said. "Turn off the internet for a week. Then tell me what you want." I walked out on shaking legs, and the plants in the hallway watched me with patient leaves. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and screamed once, quietly, like a person who doesn't want to trouble the neighbors. Then I called the reporter and said 3 words: "I'm ready now." The story broke on a Sunday night because that's when people eat drama with their phones. The headline was surgical: "Charismatic Freedom." Coach funneled millions from followers to shell companies. The photos were kind to him. He'd always photographed well. But the documents were not. The legacy fund was a sieve that emptied into a trust whose beneficiaries were 2 men with the same last name and a third with no face online. The income claims were illegal. "Earn 6 figures in 6 months or your money back" was written down by someone who never met a regulator. The refunds were a labyrinth. The retreats were mostly mirages. The testimonials were bought, stacked like polished fruit in a grocery display. My name was in the piece. Not as a villain, not as a savior, just as a person who'd stopped lying and kept her face on. I told the truth with my voice on tape, and the reporter kept the part where my voice trembled and the part where I said, "I'm so sorry," to women whose names I never learned. In the space of an hour, my inbox flooded with anger and relief. Death threats and fruit baskets, lawsuits promised and prayers offered. I turned my phone face down and breathed until morning. He went live. Of course he did. Monday at noon, crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled. He sat in front of a bookshelf that held a single candle, a single book, a framed photo of him on stage with his arms spread like a christening. "Beloveds," he began, and I almost laughed from the nausea of it. "We are being tested." He said the reporter was a hater. He said I'd been manipulated. He said our enemies couldn't stand that ordinary people were becoming wealthy without the permission of old money. He wept, one tear the size of a pearl, and the comments lit like a match. "We love you." "I'll die for this work." "Keep going." He smiled, sainted, and asked for 10 brave souls to sow into the legacy fund. "Not for me," he said. "For the movement." He raised $2.3 million in 19 minutes. Regulators don't move that fast, but survivors do. The women I'd failed, the men I'd coached, the friends who'd quit, they began to tell their stories with their names. They posted screenshots of balances, zeros, and red text. They posted photos of eviction notices, of half-packed boxes. They posted their rank bracelets cut in half and laid in their palms like strange coin. We DM'd each other at 3 a.m., a constellation of remorse and resolve. We wrote a letter to the state attorney general, then another to the FTC. We petitioned the credit card processors, sent affidavits, filed chargebacks. Someone slipped a spreadsheet into my inbox that wasn't supposed to exist. Distributor earnings by percentile. The bottom 73% had earned less than $100 in a year. The top 0.4% had earned enough to post from beaches. The rest existed to clap and to pay. When the offices were raided, I wasn't there. I was in a church basement with folding chairs and coffee in urns, holding a woman's hand while she cried because her mother had pawned her wedding ring to pay for Ascension 2. I didn't scream when the first breaking news banner flashed. I exhaled. I let my shoulders drop. Then I sent the clip to the reporter with a single line. It's starting. He was arrested the next morning, not with a spotlight, but with a quiet knock, a warrant, a courtesy for a man whose suits television viewers recognized. The indictment named wire fraud, money laundering, deceptive marketing practices, and a violation of a previous consent decree he'd signed a decade ago earlier under a different brand. They listed the Legacy Fund. They listed shell companies with names like ArcLight and Sincere Holdings. They listed goods and services that had been promised but never delivered. They listed the thing we all knew in our bones before our mouths gave in. It wasn't a ladder. It was a funnel. He didn't go quietly in his heart. He smirked for the cameras, the head tilt of a man who believed the world was in on his joke. "See you soon," he said into one lens as if it were a lover. The hashtag trended, hashtag see you soon. The faithful posted black squares and candles, photos of their rank bracelets arranged like rosaries on marble countertops. They said the charges were an initiation. They said he'd bought the judge 2 lifetimes ago. They said we were Judas for telling the truth. I stopped reading after midnight and took a bath so hot it reminded me I had skin. The trial was a theater of spreadsheets. Nothing takes the magic out of a room like numbers that answer back. The prosecutors were methodical. The defense tried to turn it into a biography. A man who came from nothing, who loved too big, who moved too fast, and delegated to wolves. They called me to the stand. I told the truth in my calm voice and kept my guilt in my pocket where it wouldn't leak across the floor. He looked at me once, and I felt the pull of a current I'd been drowning in for years. Then I remembered Vera's insulin and Marta's hammock, and the woman who sold her piano to buy Ascension 3. I turned slightly and spoke to the jury instead. The verdict wasn't a surprise. The sentence was not soft. The judge spoke about harm and hubris, about the need for sentences to speak louder than live streams. The cameras flashed as they led him away, and a woman in the gallery screamed, "I love you," through a sob that sounded like an altar breaking. He didn't turn. He kept his shoulders broad like a brand. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I felt empty first, like the morning after a storm that took the fence, the shed, the pear tree, and left your house standing just so you'd have to look at what you let happen. The refunds didn't pour, they dripped. The restitution plan covered almost nothing for almost no one. The government said there was $750 million unaccounted for, money that had flowed through Freedom Academy and out of it, like a river beneath a glacier, no one was allowed to map. Where? I asked the air many nights. Where did we put our faith? It took me a long time to stop saying we when I meant I. I started a small fund with a name that didn't sound like hope. We called it Receipts. No stages, no rank bracelets, no breath work, just small checks to cover rent, groceries, meds. I sold a Power Cranberry blazer and my rank bracelets for a few coins on a resale app and put the money there. It wasn't penance. It was math. It was a way to say, I see you. I'm sorry. Here's a thing that buys time while your nervous system learns the difference between applause and safety. I didn't write about him, not publicly. The book offers came, and I said I was still rearranging my furniture. The podcast invited me, and I said I didn't know how to talk about a forest yet. I was still picking bark out of my hair. My mother sent articles in envelopes the old way. Be kind to the part of you that wanted to be lit, she wrote in one note. Some men can smell that kerosene. I got a job at a bookstore. I stacked paperbacks and watched people find themselves for $17.99. I found a small therapist's office with a ficus that didn't hate its life and gave my trust to a woman who asked good questions and never once told me to be bigger. The end of his story came in a sentence, a phone alert I almost didn't check because I was in line for lemons. Former Freedom CEO dead in federal custody, it read. The subhead did the blunt thing. Officials call it a suicide. The article said he'd been found in his cell before dawn. It said there were no signs of foul play. It said the investigation was ongoing. It said the prison had been short-staffed that night. It said his attorneys were shocked. I stood with 2 lemons in my left hand and 1 in my right, and wept so quietly the cashier didn't notice. Not for the man, exactly. Maybe a little. Mostly for the machine that made him plausible. For the way we strap our hunger to the first voice that says it knows the way out. For the people who would never get their insulin, their piano, their rent, their sleep back. For the men in linen who mistake the stage for a baptismal and the live stream for a mirror. I paid for the lemons and walked out into the heat, and the sun was doing that thing where it pretends it can explain anything. People messaged me. They were angry. They were relieved. They wanted a villain who stayed alive so they could keep practicing their lines. And now they had to decide what to do with their mouths. Some wrote justice. Some wrote coward. Some wrote I loved him. I wrote back, take a breath. Drink water. Log off. I didn't post a black square. I didn't post a white one. I lit a candle that wasn't a hashtag and sat on the floor and told the truth to the ceiling. He promised people freedom. He sold them a prison. That sentence is still true, with or without him breathing. There's a part of me that wants to pull out the blueprints and redline every corridor we mistook for a door. There's another part that wants to rip up every stage like carpet. But most days, I just make coffee and send small checks and help people read the fine print in the contracts they're handed, the sacred ones and the ones that come in glossy envelopes. If you want a parable, here. The latter is real, but only if you don't stack it on backs. The key is real, but only if you don't sell it. The movement is real, but only if you're willing to move away from the man who needs to be adored to live. I still think about the first night, row 7, borrowed shoes, silk scarf I never gave back. The way his words lit me up from the inside. A clean burn I mistook for truth. I don't want to be the kind of woman who despises the parts of herself that wanted fire. I want to be the kind who knows the difference between a hearth and a blaze that leaves nothing. Sometimes late, when the inbox goes quiet and the plants lean toward whatever darkness gives them, I replay a different clip in my head. Not him on a stage, not me on a witness stand. A room with harsh light and a folding table, and a woman in a borrowed blazer, counting $20 bills she will turn into groceries. She laughs because it's not enough and then laughs again because it is this week. I watch her tuck the money into her wallet as if it were a map. I watch her stand. I watch her go home. There's a little boy in my building who sells lemonade with a seriousness that breaks me open. He draws crooked signs and sets out paper cups like he learned dignity from plastic. The other day, he waved me over and said, "It's free for you because you always say hi." I gave him $5 anyway, and he said, "That's not the rule." And I said, "Today it is." He grinned and poured and told me his lemonade was special because he added a pinch of salt. "It wakes the sweet up," he said, and I almost put my head on the card table and sobbed. I took a sip, and he was right. I don't know how to end this except to say, if someone hands you a ladder, ask who's holding it steady. If someone sells you a key, ask who locked the door. If someone points at your cage, check whether their hands are clean. If someone calls you fire, decide for yourself what you'll burn and what you'll warm. And keep receipts, especially the tender ones. They are how you prove to your future that you paid for this freedom with more than applause. Dive into stories that stir your soul. Jackie Smith. Stories is your daily haven for raw emotions, courageous women, and authentic true life narratives. We weave tales of hope, strength, dreams, and the quiet miracles of everyday life. Our stories inspire, uplift, and remind you you're never alone. Subscribe now to experience a fresh, heartfelt chapter every day that sparks wonder and connection. Join our community and be part of the journey.